I just want to welcome you to this week's episode of the Imperfect Show. And Jeremy and I this week are just going to really talk about the family. And we are looking at just the importance of family values and what that is to our society, and the importance of establishing those and having them, and what that looks like for the family. We haven't really done a lot of episodes about, I feel like we've done a few here and there about parenting and family, but this week we just wanted to focus on this one aspect of just the importance of having family values and what that's founded in, and really for this week especially, why that's important in our society.
Yep. Family values are something that I think we pay lip service to, and politicians talk about family values, churches talk about family values. At different times, we recognize the importance of family values. I don't think we always know what that means, though. What those are, and then why they're important, kind of to society at large, and what all that means. We've seen some crazy things happen over the last couple of months. I feel like we've been in this crazy cycle forever. It feels like
never ending.
Yeah, it feels never ending. But we this last week have witnessed some things in our countries regarding race and race relations, and an understanding of kind of the responsibilities of police and how all that works. If you've turned on the news one time or social media one time, you've probably been overwhelmed with this conversation. But we've seen this conversation unfold, and then on the other side of that, police officer does something clearly wrong. A life is lost in the process of that. Protests take place, and then those protests turn into something different than I think most of us would recognize as a peaceful protest. And again, depending on your perspective on all of that, that's not what this is about. But what we've seen unfold in large part is a lot of folks in a lot of places trying to navigate some very difficult issues without a solid compass to navigate those issues. They're trying to do this, they're trying to do that. Some are saying do more, some are saying do less. And our country now is grappling with what's the best way to deal with some of these things. And we're really struggling to know what that is. A friend of mine, Matthew Marsden, he's been a friend and is very active on Twitter. And he said this today on Twitter. He said, what we're witnessing now is the product of generations of bad parenting. What we are witnessing now is the product of generations of bad parenting. And again, that's not in reference to race or anything else. When we see people behave badly, often it's because they have not been taught well. They behave badly because they haven't been taught well. And again, that's on both sides of this equation. It doesn't matter how you're coming at it. When you see people doing things that are kind of antithetical to society and to justice and to all these things that we say are important, so often it goes back to just bad parenting. And for the conversation that we're in right now, we could say to really a misunderstanding of family values.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe just compartmentalizing as well. So we don't, even as parents, as people, we compartmentalize like different areas of our life, and a lot of times we don't look to the future and how what we're doing right now will impact the future, not just for us immediate, but also for people coming behind us, and for the future of just our society. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and I mentioned something about what I think about is maybe just the impact that this particular decision will have, for the future. And I think a lot of people don't look at maybe just the seemingly small decisions that we make every day and think about how that has such an impact on, the future of our society.
Right.
And I think parents especially need to be so looking at this thing that seems really small right now, whatever that daily thing is that you're dealing with, can have such a, how is this going to impact the future of not just my child, but the way that they interact with society, and the small, maybe teaching about kindness, or even, just within our family, we try to, teach kindness with each other. And I even have a sign in the kids' bathroom that says, if you can be anything, be kind, because I want them to be reminded of, maybe I'm not having a good day, maybe I'm unhappy with this particular situation, this thing that I'm dealing with in my life right now, but if I can be anything today for the people around me, to be kind. And we try to teach that to our kids within our home, like with each other.
Right.
But what impact does that have by teaching just the simple act of kindness in your home? What kind of an impact does that have, not just for the people in your house, but also for society and for your child then to go out and be kind in society and to make those kinds of decisions? And it seems like a small thing, but a lot of times I think, especially for parents, it's so important to look at the future of your child, but the future of society in itself as you're teaching those values in your home.
Yeah, we talk about the concept or the idea of legacy often, and legacy is what you're leaving behind, and we're all leaving something behind. We'll all leave a legacy of some kind behind. Is it a good one or is it a bad one? We talk often about that, but we talk about family values. Understanding those values is really understanding that as parents or as a parent, and we historically we talk about the nuclear family, and it's a dad and a mom, and it's very traditional in its setup. That's not what we're talking about right now. Really what we're talking about is parents, whoever has influence over children, instilling values in them that will be that compass in their life as they move forward. And so, where you have to start for this is that conversation is, as a parent, as someone who's influencing children, maybe you're not a parent, maybe you're an aunt or an uncle or an older person who is influencing younger people. The influencing that I'm leveraging toward them or with them, what impact will that have in the future? And it's thinking future. It really is thinking about the legacy. What am I going to leave behind that is valuable? And I think that's a great place to start in a conversation like this.
Yeah, and it really starts, you can't just jump into that. It's not something that you can do for other people if you don't have that for yourself. And so I think it's also a conversation to what are my values and where do I start with that? Yeah. And so I think that's not really even just something that you can just, as an influencer, a parent type, I guess, influencer, you can say, you can't instill values, you can't, have those kinds of things if you don't have that in your own life.
Right.
You can't have that for other people.
Yeah, it begins with you so that you can teach others. A couple of things as we jump into the conversation, and we can talk about specific applications, but understanding what we mean by family values and then understanding where the family came from, I think is also important to take a look at. Dictionary, that book with all the words in it, a dictionary definition of family values is something like this: the moral and ethical principles traditionally upheld and passed on within a family as fidelity, honesty, truth, and faith. So I spoke very slowly, very deliberately. Here's what it is: the moral and ethical principles traditionally upheld and passed on within a family as fidelity, honesty, truth, and faith. So those principles that you would say, again, they're important to you. These are principles that are important to me, and I'm going to pass those on within the context of my family, right? And so what that means is your family then becomes a place where you're not just protecting children until they get old enough to go out and do their own thing. It's a place where you are able to instill values that will equip them to go out into life and make good decisions. We can get to some specific examples of this later, but where did the family come from? Maybe you're not a person who spends a lot of time concerned about the Bible, what the Bible says. We're Christians, and so we approach these issues from a position of faith. And I think this is fundamental to getting a hold of this. When we consider the family, because people will say, well, why is the family necessary? Or why is the family the place that should happen? Or why would you even have a conversation about family values? We have to understand that of all of the things that take place in the world, God instituted, we find in the Bible, only three things, three ordained by God institutions. And the family is one of those. The other two are government. You could, again, if you had your Bible, Genesis chapter 9, verse 5, and then in the New Testament, several passages talk about the government and God instituting the government, the church. Very important. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Acts chapter 20 and verse 28, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20 talk about the church. This is not those conversations, so we won't spend a lot of time there. But the family was instituted by God as well. So three organizations: the government, the church, and the family. God gave us the family. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24, Adam has been there. Eve was created. You know the story. This is before she got everybody in trouble. She got us all in trouble. But before all that,
anyways, that's another whole other conversation.
Another whole conversation.
Too.
Before
We're not
all
going to
that,
talk about that right now.
God brought Eve to Adam and formed a family, and he said, "You're now," Eve looked at her and said, "You're bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. We are one." And God said, "Now, for the future, for all time, therefore, because of this, a man will leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife." And so we see the institution of the family. Later on in the Bible, we see that God really lifts up the family, and that teaching and training of children should happen in the context of the family. In the New Testament, we're told to raise your children up, train them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, teach them to live right. That's really important. But in the Old Testament, in the very beginning, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, this is part of what is called the Shema. It's the Jewish confession of faith. This is what Jewish children would have learned, and then throughout the life of a Jew in the Old Testament, they would have recited these verses and recited these prayers. But in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, the Bible says this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might." So the standard is set. It's God. Okay, that's it. "And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently unto your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk in the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon your head, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes." So this is a great passage. A lot is said here. But you boil this passage down. Here's what it's saying. God said, I'm the authority. You should love me and live for me and do things for me as your creator. And then you need to teach these things diligently to your children. So again, God is reinforcing in this passage the truth that values are passed on from one generation to another. That values are instilled from the parent to the child. And again, we can step back and say, this isn't always a biological parent to a child. Mm-hmm. This could be an adopted parent-child relationship. This could be an aunt or an uncle that has a lot of influence over their nieces or nephews or whatever the case. This could be maybe a mentor relationship. Whatever this is, it's within the context of how you define family. We could talk about that later. But understanding that relationship exists to not only provide protection and security in food and clothing and all those things, but to instill values that will equip that child to go out and live their life. That's what family values are all about. It's crazy we've turned this almost into a political conversation. Mm-hmm. The political values coalition, or the family values coalition, mm-hmm. and all these things. I'm not against those things, but this isn't a political conversation. It's a conversation about parents influencing their children in a way that will make them better adults when they grow up. Mm-hmm. I said a lot. I'll stop talking. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You're saying a lot of good things. I don't really have much more to say. No, I really like that passage in Deuteronomy because it talks about basically talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
And these are conversations that we're having all the time. And specifically, this passage is talking about the Bible, and we're talking about, we're meditating on it, we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, we're listening to it, where it's like a constant part of your life. And I think that's the only way that our kids are going to be able to influence society in a positive way.
Right. If
those things are constantly being taught, constantly being talked about, and these are things then that they are constantly thinking about, talking about, and sharing with other people, then that influences society in that way. And
that's right.
That's the only way that's going to happen.
Yep.
Is if that's something that's a constant part of our life personally, and then it overflows into us making that a part of our family. And again, like you said, it doesn't matter what that looks like for you, whatever influence you have in your life. But I think that all of us need to make an effort to be able to influence young people around us, because that's the only way that our society is going to be impacted, and that we're going to see a difference made in those areas. And so I think constantly allowing that to be part of our personal life, and then teaching it to our kids, and it's just a part of everything that we do.
Right. There are a lot of different ways to look at this, and illustrations aren't perfect, but I think about someone who gets in a severe car accident and maybe there's internal damage done. What needs to happen is a surgery must take place to fix whatever's broken on the inside, to help heal that and to get it to a place where it functions right. But when a first responder shows up, what they deal with immediately is perhaps the bleeding or some other injury that's going to kill the person if it's not dealt with immediately. I think that often in our society and in our culture, and again, we're seeing a lot of this play out around us right now, what we're screaming about is the injury that's going to cause death while ignoring the internal injuries that no one can see and not dealing with the things that really make a healthy body. We talk about these systemic issues, again, whether it's racism or whatever the issue is. Racism is the one that's on everyone's mind right now. We look at issues like that, and there's so many of them. We're in a political season, so we'll hear issue after issue after issue come up. This is a big one we're all kind of grappling with right now. When we talk about these systemic issues, these ills of society, these things that are damaging us culturally, often what we want to do is point to the head that's bleeding or the arm that needs a tourniquet on it or something else. We need to say, let's get to that, let's get to that, let's get to that. And it's good, we need to do that, we need to stop the bleeding. But at some point we have to step back and say, what's the real problem? What really caused this? What is the internal damage that's been done, and how can we address that? And that's what family values are all about. Family values are about saying, let's not get to the place where we have to stop the bleeding. Let's create something that's healthy, something that can process life and the craziness of society well, and let's instill those values so that we never get to the place where we're experiencing the things that we are right now. And man, this is a conversation that all of us need to have with our children. How are we helping our children process even what we're experiencing right now? How are we helping our children to understand and to grapple with these things and to look at these things and to know what they should do? Are we helping them? If we're not, then we're creating something that will take place later on because they were never taught. They never had these issues tied to their values system.
And they're not going to know how to, stand up for right, stand against what's wrong, and just be able to, lead in that way if they're not taught that. And that's why I really like that quote that Matthew Marsden put out, just about it's just the product of bad parenting. And I feel like that is, one of the sources that, instead of looking at all the effects, and it's been kind of frustrating this week just to hear, people posting and talking about just all these things, but they're the result of, a heart issue, or the result of, like he said, bad parenting, or, it's what we're seeing is just the result of, deep issues that have not been dealt with or even, addressed. And so that is what's really, really frustrating, is that there's a lot of people talking about, the bleeding, but we're not fixing, the actual root of the problem. And so that's not going to happen if, people don't start to take those things seriously. And our kids are not going to know how to function in society if we don't personally take it seriously and then teach them how to, be kind and stand against wrong and stand for right. And I just think that's what it is. It's the root of the issue.
That's right. To be clear, there are bad people that had good parents.
Yes.
So not every bad action is the result of a bad parent.
I don't think we're talking about that.
But it's amazing the difference that good parents can make in a society. So let's talk about briefly, with a few minutes that we have, some of the important values that we need to instill in our children and the reason for that. I would say that one of the first values we need to instill in our children is the value or the understanding that there is something bigger than them in the world. That the world does not revolve around them, and that there's something outside of them. And I think most parents inadvertently teach their children that they are the center of the universe. And so they grow up believing that they're the center of the universe. And what that means is they don't value other people more than they value themselves. And they begin to act out in a way that reflects their value, that they are the most important person in whatever situation they find themselves in. For people of faith, I think we would say that something bigger is God. God is, He created, therefore it's about Him and not us, and we need to live a life that reflects that. But a value that has to be taught is the value that I'm not the center of the universe.
I think that's really, I think you're right. A lot of, parents probably just by default or by,
Yeah.
Just raise kids like the entire home revolves around them. And when we were first started having kids, I, read a series of books, and that was one of the big premises of these parenting books was allowing your child to be part of the family looks very different than the family's revolving around the child. And when you bring a child into your family, that is one of the very first, most important things to teach them. And you can teach that to them as a baby in how you treat them and how you raise them and how you parent them. And so I would really agree that that's kind of one of the first things that really, as we raise our kids, that's what we do.
So another value, and I like to think of the value system. What is a system? It means all of the elements are connected somehow. And when you're teaching family values, it should be tied to a system. So if you say, for instance, that God is, and if God is and He created, then we need to live for Him, then the next part of that system would be understanding what the Creator wants us to do. So it would be, again, for instance, and in our case, it would be valuing church, a place where what the Creator wants us to do is taught. Mm-hmm. It would be valuing the Bible and asking the question, not what do I want to find in the Bible, not what do I want it to say, but what does it say? What does the Creator say to me through the Bible? And then I'm going to act on that. Why? Because my first value is that God is and that we live for Him, and His Word is to me to understand what He wants me to do. So that's how this is tied together. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, if that's your value system, then it should be tied together. But understanding, first of all, that you're not the center of the universe, I think the next value you should have is I then, since I'm not the center of the universe, need to live for others. Mm-hmm. I need to live to serve others. Can you talk about that, but then how we teach that? That's a challenge in a home to teach. Yeah. I need to live for others.
Yes. It's a challenge because if you kind of go through that process of, they're not the center of the universe, and then if I'm going to live how God created me to live, I'm going to live for others. It really does start, in your home. And like I said, with kids, teaching them how to respect their siblings and how to live for others in that way and how to serve others. I think practically speaking, what that looks like is when your kids are part of a family, that means they contribute to the household. And I have some really strong opinions about allowances and paying your kids to do things that they should be doing anyways. And that's a different conversation. But I feel like it's just teaching them to contribute to the family as a member of the family. I'm going to take care of my things so that the people that are coming behind me are, I'm respecting the fact that I'm sharing the space with them. Right. And really just being a member, you say a respectable member of your family before they can be a respectable member of society. And I feel like that when they learn those things, I'm not the center of the universe, I'm going to live to serve others. I think that we can be such an example of that ourselves is by, having them serve, with us. If you are a part of a church, taking them to church with you and serving in a ministry together, just really showing them by what you're doing, what that looks like to serve other people. And that's going to make a huge impact when they're thinking those things. And maybe you don't tell them, okay, you're not the center of the universe, you need to live to serve other people. But just by teaching them more by doing rather than saying, and bringing them along with you, and doing those things, that will make such a difference in how they treat other people. And then if they don't view themselves as the center, they're not going to, they're going to have the bigger picture of, okay, God created me for a purpose. That means God created them for a purpose. That means if God created me in His image, God created them in His image. And they're going to view other people the way that you're teaching them to view themselves. And if they're not the center, that means, okay, this person's also not the center. They're the same as me. They were created the same as I was, and they have a purpose in their life just like I do. And I'm going to live for them, and I'm going to serve them, and I'm going to honor them, and I'm going to do those kinds of things. And I think we can teach our kids to do that by being an example of doing that ourselves. Yeah. And I can think of a lot of practical examples, but I think that is the biggest one of where it starts, is that they're going to look to us and how we view ourselves in society, and how we say, if we think of ourselves to be the center of the universe and we act like that and we treat them like that, then they're going to act like that too. Right. And and I think if we allow them to come alongside us in serving other people, then they're going to do the same thing.
Yep.
And I feel like that's kind of the place to start, is just allowing them to watch you do that.
Yep. And
maybe kind of having them come alongside you and do that.
We talked about leadership a couple of weeks ago, and you can go back and watch that if you haven't. But my understanding of leadership and what we talked about is that kind of the heart of leadership is service. It's understanding. It's not about me. It's about me using what I have for the benefit of others. And that as a value changes a person's complete outlook. And imagine how that impacts someone who is in a position of authority. And authority is something we're struggling with right now. Like, right? I mean, what does authority look like, and what are the limits of authority, and all those things. All of those questions are answered in the value. I need to use what I have available to me for the benefit of others. And if we keep that in mind, we understand that it's not about me. It's not about me getting from someone what I want or fulfilling some kind of an agenda that I have. It's about me utilizing what I have for the benefit of those that I have the opportunity to serve. Because when it's not about me, then I need to serve. And if I'm serving, then that should reflect my understanding that it's more about them than it is myself. I think the third thing, and if you lay these three things out on a line, you've got, I'm not the center of the universe. There's something bigger than me. If there's something bigger than me, then my goal in life is to serve. If you lay those two things out, there's a lot of space between those two things, and a lot of steps and a lot of things that fall into that. Remember, this is about perspective. This is the Imperfect show. We call it the Imperfect show because life is so messy and it's so hard. And when you're raising kids, you do it wrong sometimes and you make mistakes, but you've got to have a lens that you look at the world through. And when questions come up you don't have the answers to, you need to have a perspective that allows you to navigate the issues that you're struggling with. And that's what this does for me. The world is not about me. There's something bigger. I'm not the center of the universe. But in my place, I need to serve others. That's what I need to do. And while I'm doing that, this is the third part when I think of family values. And again, there's 1,000 different things on this timeline you also talk about and build in and help to create so that we can grapple with these things. But the last part of that is, and we talked about this a minute ago, I need to live in a way that I'll leave something behind that I'm proud to have left behind. Again, you can use the word legacy. We use the word legacy a lot, but the world is not about me. I'm not the center of the universe. I exist to serve others. And while I do that, I want to do it in such a way that I'm proud of what I leave behind. I want to leave something behind that others can follow. And if they follow it, they'll end up in the right place.
I think about, we were talking about this, doing this for the show. You think about just people that have had the opportunity to influence, other people's lives. And Jeremy mentioned a little while ago about, maybe you're not a parent, maybe you are an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, but you have the opportunity to influence, people, kids around you, or even young people around you. People that are parents, maybe you have an opportunity to influence them if they do not have the example of, having the kind of parents that, they want to be, and they're just trying to figure it out. But whatever your sphere of influence is, just think about the impact that you can have in someone's life. And I've heard people talk about people they knew years ago, long time ago, that just for a short period of time had such an influence in their lives, and really now have made an impact in the way that those people are living their lives now. And so if we just think about it even that way, just any opportunity that you have to influence other people,
right,
so that you have no idea what an impact that's going to make for other people. And so even if it's, even if you don't have kids, or even if it is your kids, but in addition to that, who can you be influencing in your life that will make a difference for generations to come? And you have no idea what that person is going to do with their life, and how God is going to use that person, and just the influence that you can have in their life for generations to come.
That's right. As a God-ordained, God-given institution, I really believe in a lot of ways the family is the answer for so many of the issues that we're dealing with in our culture. We talk about the institution of authority, and in that sense, we're talking about leadership in a political sense. God set up a political structure. We see that even in the Old Testament. But that's staffed by, filled by human beings who get it wrong sometimes. But when done right, authority can tremendously influence a society for good, when done right. The local church. God gave us the church. In Acts chapter 20, the Bible says Christ died for the church. The church and a society should really make that society better and that culture better. God gave us the church for that reason. And then the family. The family is the place, the primary place, the number one place where values should be taught to children so that those children can then grow up and influence society and culture in a good way. And what we're seeing around us in so many ways, we could say it's sin, it's brokenness, it's all of those things. It really is. But a great way to really understand it is it's generations of parents who probably did not take this responsibility of influencing their children for good as seriously as they should have. Now, you could push back and say, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's work, and there's this, and there's that, and these distractions, and all those things. All of those things may be true. But a few things can be true at the same time. Maybe all of those things do exist. They are a struggle. It is a challenge. But that doesn't change the fact that if we want to change our world, we need to invest in our children in such a way that they know how to navigate the future. The importance of family values.
Yeah, and really that's kind of how I've been thinking about it the last couple of days. Like, parents need to do such a better job of taking this seriously, because
us included. This is not a throwing rocks at anybody. This is
for me.
We all need to have a moment where we go.
Well, this is what for me, I've been very convicted about this the last couple of days. That's what I'm saying. With all of this happening, is just doing such a better job of teaching this to our kids and influencing them in that way, so that they can. And having conversations and just, even having political conversations. We do a lot of that.
We're good at that around here.
So just having those conversations with our kids, and we need to be doing such a better job. And when I'm saying parents, I'm talking about all parents, that us included, is what I've been so convicted about, is that we just need to do a much better job of doing that.
Yeah. I hope that's helped you. These are some thoughts that we should all be thinking. But there are times along the way where we're reminded of these things, and we're all reminded to step back and go, man, am I doing this? Am I investing the way that I should? And am I using these opportunities for the benefit of the next generation? So, hope that's helped you. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next time.